Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 2530, the Taxpayer Transparency and Efficient Audit Act, is a direct response to testimony and inquiries and news reports that the Ways and Means Committee and other interested members of Congress have heard about as it relates to the IRS scandal. Part of the difficulty that American taxpayers have, Mr. Speaker, is that they feel that they're basically on their heels, that the Internal Revenue Service has all the power and has all the inertia and has all the momentum, and if you're a taxpayer and the IRS is coming after you, you feel as if, look, this is a one-way street, and they're able to target and they're able to focus and they're able to keep all this momentum and have us on our heels. So this is an effort to correct this problem, and every time the IRS shares a taxpayer's information, the IRS under this bill must send a disclosure letter to the taxpayer within 30 days of the disclosure, except in cases where it would be detrimental to an ongoing criminal investigation or to national security. Whenever the IRS receives correspondence from a taxpayer, the IRS must substantively respond within 30 days. And the response, Mr. Speaker, can't simply be a pat on the head and an acknowledgement letter, but it's got to be a substantive reply. And finally, the bill creates the goal that audit should be completed within 1 year, and if not, the IRS must send an explanation to the taxpayer as why it took too long. So in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is to put the IRS on notice that they've got an obligation to operate within certain time frames, that is 30-day response and a substantive response, finish an audit in a year, and if you can't finish it in a year, have a good explanation as to why, and then also to make sure that if information is being disclosed to someone else, and again, outside the context of a criminal investigation or a national security incident, but if it's being disclosed outside the IRS, then the IRS has to disclose that to the taxpayer. Now, you might be thinking, well, what in the world? That's against the law already, that this information shouldn't be being shared outside the Internal Revenue Service. And you'd be right in thinking that. The problem is, we heard testimony, and it was very compelling testimony, Mr. Speaker, from a witness down in Texas who described this experience. Her name was Catherine Engelbrecht, and she was the founder of an organization called True the Vote. Now, this is somebody who decided to participate in public life, decided to get organized and have a group. And lo and behold, over a period of time, once she decided that she was going to petition the federal government for status for her group, True the Vote, to be involved in election issues and ballot integrity issues, all of a sudden she finds herself the subject of a great deal of interest from other elements of the federal government that have nothing to do with the tax inquiry. So she is visited, and according to my information, she has 15 different visits from 4 different federal agencies. Now, we may never get to the bottom of where it came from, where the leak took place, what was the theory behind it, and how all that came to pass. But, Mr. Speaker, we know this. We know that we can do something about it. We know that we can put limitations on the Internal Revenue Service that creates a duty and an obligation and a legal sanction around which the IRS has to operate that says you cannot disclose this information, and if this information is disclosed, you have a duty to let the taxpayer know. So clearly what we're trying to do with this legislation is to limit the Internal Revenue Service, not from collecting taxes, not from enforcing the law, not from doing the things that they are tasked and created by this body to do, but instead to do it in a limited fashion, to be wise, not to be abusive, not to be lording power over taxpayers. Because, Mr. Speaker, when it all comes down to it, let's not forget this. We have a system of taxation that is based on what? It's based on voluntary compliance. We don't have the ability, the federal government does not have the ability to go about and do all this enforcement. So a voluntary tax compliance system is presumed. And what does that mean? That means that the taxpayer has to have confidence that the tax-paying institution itself has integrity. And as we know, that integrity is seriously in question. So I urge the favorable consideration of H.R. 2530, and I retain the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.